Hello everyone, my name is Gabby, and welcome back to another episode of Tropes, Shonen, and Dragon Ball. Our topic for this episode? The Worf Effect.
Goku, you know Yamcha, right? Would you say he's a pretty decent fighter?
Yeah, he's really good. I fought him once, and he used some crazy attack move on me.
Then if he can't touch this Jackie Chun guy, I think we're in trouble.
Previously on Tropes, Shonen, and Dragon Ball, we'd left off on a particular predicament. The power of characters had been increasing so rapidly that they could no longer be communicated using feats alone. After all, by the fight with Frieza, these characters apparently had enough power to destroy planets. You could no longer use the typical, I can cause bigger explosions, so therefore I am stronger. Because you can't really have a bigger explosion than blowing up a planet. Akira Toriyama himself seemed to realize this problem pretty early on in Z, and that was why he introduced power levels. It was a way of showing that the power scale was increasing without having to show a character's feats and abilities. Of course, as we explained in the last episode, even this trope had some shortfalls, and that was probably why the concept was dropped altogether. But once power levels were dropped, the story was far from over, and the power scale was still increasing. So as a result, the most important question in the later era of Dragon Ball became, how can we show that the power scale is increasing without resorting to either power levels or by judging the size of their explosions? The answer to that was a trope that TV Tropes calls the Worf Effect. What is this strange sounding term, you ask? To put it simply, the Worf Effect refers to a situation where a character who has already been established to be powerful is defeated in battle by an antagonist, solely to prove how even more powerful that antagonist is. The name comes from Star Trek The Next Generation. Worf was one of the commanding officers on the fleet. He was also a Klingon, a very powerful alien race. The name of the trope comes from the fact that in the series, Worf had a habit of getting defeated by the villain of that episode just to prove how much of a threat they were. And it happened a lot. But Dragon Ball uses this trope just as much as Star Trek does. Really, a lot of stories where combat is the main focus does this lot. It's very widespread and it's very useful. Really, the Worf Effect is actually quite similar to the concept of power levels. In a way, it is also a power scale. The difference is, instead of having a scale based on numbers, you have a scale based on establishing characters. See, naturally, as we progress through the story in Dragon Ball, we learn how powerful the characters are. We can see characters like Goku who can deflect bullets, lift cars, and all manner of crazy feats. We see characters in the tournaments, we see special moves, we see a whole bunch of things, and we know what the characters can do. In a world of ever-increasing strength like in Dragon Ball, the characters themselves are often the only ones you can rely on in having consistent power. Because we've spent so much time watching them fight, we roughly know what they're capable of. But newly introduced characters don't have this advantage. When they come into the story, we don't know anything about them. We don't know how strong they are. But if they're an antagonist, we need to know that they're strong. We need to know they're threatening, otherwise they won't seem like an obstacle at all. And what better way to establish their threat than to defeat a character that we already know to be strong? It's a perfect way to show the audience this new character is strong. If they beat a member of the supporting cast, we automatically assume that they're stronger than that member of the cast. We don't hesitate, we don't say that's stupid, we just accept it at face value, because why wouldn't we? In terms of its use in Dragon Ball, the Worf Effect has been implemented often. It's sort of both the predecessor and successor to power levels. Honestly, there are so many examples of it that explaining each and every one of them would take me all day. It was used before power levels were introduced in Dragon Ball, mostly in the tournaments. A character who wasn't Goku would be defeated by the antagonist in the tournament setting to prove the powers of Jackie Chun, Ten Shinhan, and Ma Jr. In the Z era, members of the supporting cast, or even Goku himself, would be defeated and sometimes even killed by the new villains with the ever-increasing power. It became a lot more prevalent in this era simply because, after all, we couldn't use their feats to compare power anymore. The Worf Effect became the sole way to prove a villain was a threat, so as a result, it happened a lot. In the story of Dragon Ball, we ended up getting, essentially, chains of Worfing by the Cell and Majin Buu sagas. For an example, We know Perfect Cell is strong because he effortlessly took out Vegeta, who effortlessly took out Cell in his semi-perfect form, who, in his imperfect form, effortlessly took out Piccolo, who was about on par with Android 17, who was said to be stronger than Android 18, who effortlessly took out Vegeta. And then we start going full circle. While the Worf Effect was a very effective trope, it had two major flaws, especially once it started essentially holding the story up. First of all, it made the fights a little repetitive. One of the issues people have with the Cell and Majin Buu sagas is fights were almost completely one-sided. A character was always beating down another character easily until one of them got a power-up or a transformations, and then the situation was just reversed. This problem occurs pretty much because of the Worf Effect trope, because for the trope to apply, a fight has to be one-sided, otherwise we wouldn't know that the opponent is that powerful. And second of all, it was sometimes detrimental to the characters. To explain this, we're going to compare the two characters who get Worfed the most, Yamcha and Vegeta. In Dragon Ball, Yamcha was the poster boy for the Worf Effect. He gets defeated in battle at least 4 times, once by Jackie Chun, once by Mummy, once by Ten Shin Han, and once by Shen or Kami. In all of these cases, the sole reason why he was defeated was to prove how powerful these villains were. After all, Yamcha had a pretty good first impression when he was introduced, almost defeating Goku in combat, although Goku was hungry at the time. He always had the appearance of being a competent fighter, so having him lose was supposed to be a shock. In Dragon Ball Z, this trope was mostly used against Vegeta. Out of all of the Dragon Ball Z supporting cast, Vegeta was the one who probably got beaten up the most to establish a villain's threat. He was being defeated by Zarbon, Frieza, Android 18, Cell again, and I guess Majin Buu in the final battle. Like Yamcha, Vegeta had been established in Dragon Ball Z to be a competent fighter in his own right, and like Yamcha, having him be defeated was meant to be a shocking turn of events. I just find it interesting that out of these characters, one of them is the most popular character in the entire series, and the other is the butt of all jokes in the fandom. I mean, these characters serve very similar roles in the plot, so why would they be so differently received? Well, the obvious answer is most people know Yamcha from his actions in the Z era, and his record there is not very great. But the other reason comes down to the main problem of the Worf Effect. If one character gets subjected to the Worf Effect too many times without having a way to establish their competence afterwards, they lose all credibility quick. Because if a character gets Worfed, even once, they immediately seem weak, especially if other characters take on the antagonist later who beat them and then do an even better job. The character who got Worfed needs to do something to prove that they're still strong. Vegeta successfully does this. For every loss, he also gets a win. Vegeta manages to kill Qui, Dodoria, Zarbon, a few members of the Ginyu Force, Android 20, and Pui Pui. He also manages to dominate the fight against second form Cell, at least until Cell transforms. Yamcha doesn't have this. The fact is, after his first appearance, Yamcha only wins one fight in the entire series, and that's against the Invisible Man, and even then he needed help to win. While Vegeta was allowed to prove his competence, Yamcha was not. And that was why even in Dragon Ball, before Z, Yamcha became the butt of everyone's jokes. See, Yamcha isn't actually weak, he's just weak comparatively. But in a show like Dragon Ball, if you're not as strong, you might as well not even be there. At the end of the day, despite all its flaws, the Worf Effect is still going to be a part of Dragon Ball, just like it is for every other shonen material and story that involves combat at all. It's still incredibly useful, and even if it does have flaws, you can't remove it altogether. Dragon Ball taught us both how to use it and how not to use it. Hopefully later writers learn from those mistakes. And that's the Worf Effect in a nutshell. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. So as for next episode, we're going to go deep into the rabbit hole that is transformations, starting with the villains in One Winged Angel. See you then.